So, Conversing with Pelehonuamea, a workshop combining 1,000+ years of traditional Hawaiian knowledge with 200 years of scientific thought on Kīlauea volcanism. And the two people I'm going to borrow heavily from here are Don Swanson, who's going to talk about the second part of the story here when we lean on geology of Hawaii Island for more recent history. But we're going to start off with Dr. Scott Rowland over at UH Manoa, who was part of this as well. So if I can step forward here, he actually teaches a course at UH Manoa that has this as a small piece of it. But he talks about the idea of Pele traveling down an island chain as the first geologic story that is overlaps with a Pele story as well, right? So the story, there's kind of two layers to this, and let's talk about the more general version first. The idea is that Pele first came to the islands in the northwest and worked her way down an island chain towards Hawaii Island, and so by digging down into the ocean and trying to find a spot warm enough to make her home, she was able to help eruptions on Kauai, then Oahu, then Maui, and then finally made her home here on Hawaii Island. Right, that's that's the age of the islands. The hotspot is relatively stationary, and the plate's moving over it. So we have Kauai as the oldest island, followed by Oahu, followed by Molokai, Maui, and then the big island, Hawaii Island, island of Hawaii. Pardon me. So that's the first order, right? Okay, she just traveled one way, and that's the order of islands is tracked by the stories, and of course this is kind of not giving enough credit to the observation skills of the early Hawaiians. Clearly that was meant, but that's only the very, very surface level here. And so Dr. Rowland has done a good job presenting this at this workshop, talking about this idea of rejuvenation, as far as it being maybe that second deeper layer of what might be going on with this Pele travel here. And so first off, to show these are all slides from these guys' presentations as part of that release. And he does note that that is something that he wrote for the Oregon State website, talking about that progression from old to young, but it's pretty much widely accepted. That's that first level of detail there. But as far as rejuvenation means that the volcano stopped erupting for some significant amount of time and then began erupting again. And so what he's done here is marked on for each of these islands the times of how long they were not erupting. So West Maui was not erupting for 500,000 years. East Molokai was not erupting for 1,000,000 years. The Ko'olau and Oahu were not erupting for 1.2 million years. Kauai was not erupting for 1,000,000 years. Niha had a 2.6 million year gap in its eruptions there, where it stopped erupting altogether before it picked back up again and went for another not quite 2 million years there. So there are islands already sitting there essentially in a more recent layer, and then they are rejuvenated by activity, and you maybe could consider travels of Pele to be linked to that rather than the original formation of the islands. So that's what he presents here, and we'll keep at it here. And he is assuming 9 centimeter per year plate speed. That's bringing all these other islands back towards where the hotspot would have been, somewhere in a region of here, right in there. And he's got them marked in red for when they were essentially erupting, that main shield phase. In blue, where they stopped erupting. And in yellow, where they began erupting again. So you can see Maui began erupting right around there, and Niha began erupting when it was over here somewhere, and erupted all the way until fairly recently. And you can see that Kauai began erupting way back over here, and erupted all the way until fairly recently also. And Oahu, same thing, began erupting back over here and erupting until fairly recently. So you can see that a lot of these have had a lot less time since rejuvenation than the actual rejuvenation itself. Right? It's a fairly interesting time to be a human on these islands here, right? And of course, Hawaii Island is the active hotspot here. So coming into Niha here, this is the Kīlauea volcanics. Shown in red here, this is all the rejuvenation state volcanism. And it includes an area here in the north. It includes this little island that we'll mention here shortly. It includes areas on the southwest, all through here, and also this very southern tip over here as well. And so the main shield phase, the core of the island, is over here. It's this big uplands over here. That main shield is between 5.5 and 4.8 million years old, that high uplands. Right? It was active for 700,000 years. No eruptions for 2.5 million years after that. And then they erupt for 1.9 million years in the more recent phase. And Niha last erupted 300,000 years ago. Yeah, so interesting. Photo by Craig Rowland here, who is likely related to Dr. Scott Rowland. And view from the north of Niha and Lehua Island. Here is that island right there. Right? And so from kind of Helian wise, the chants say, I won't read the Hawaiian because I don't want to do it misjustice here, but translated on, as we landed next to an island known as Lehua. So Pele is said to have landed on this exact island, not necessarily on the uplands, but on this rejuvenated part of the island right there. That's interesting to note. And moving to Kauai, here's a map modified from Thordarson and Garcia, showing in red the rejuvenated stages once again. Down here at the bottom, that is the Kīlauea area. Zoomed in right here. Here's that old photograph that was included in their talk. And I added in here a Google Earth view of it. Right? And so there are actually cinder cones. One right there, right where all of houses are built. 2, 3. This might be one here in here, 4 as well, right? More visible, maybe over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, right in there. Right, showing one of the places that Pele visited in Kauai. So the Kīlauea area, and in fact, all those volcanics in Kauai are called the Kīlauea Volcanics, named after this spot, right? With very young-looking volcanic features. And of course, Kauai is very old, so you don't see a whole lot of those in other places, but you do see young volcanic cones in areas like this, and that's because of this whole rejuvenation aspect of eruptions on Hawaiian Islands. Okay, on Oahu, you see similarly lots of rejuvenation products over here. Right, so he'll step through these and talk about Salt Lake, Ailāʻau crater, Salt Pond crater. Pele dug the crater, and some salty mucus from her eye fell here, according to Pukui, place names of Hawaii. Or according to Westervelt, who maybe embellishes a little bit more, but has knowledge that's not stored anywhere else. He says, there she dug a fire pit. The earth, or rather the eruption of lava, was forced up into a hill which later bore the name of Kealiamanu. Aliamanu, Bird Salt Pond, is a place where Pele and her family lived for a while. And when Pele left, Pele dropped some salt, and the pet bird of Hiyaka, Pele's favorite sister, escaped. Once again, from place names of Hawaii there. Some interesting place names, connecting the lineage of Pele to this place, of course, as well, on Oahu. So, but young volcanic places that are, are given these volcanic stories because of young eruptions than anywhere else in the islands. Likewise, Le'ahi, also known as Diamond Head, Cocoa Rift in the background here. Here she threw up a great quantity of fire rock, but at last her fires were drowned by the water she struck below. And of course, this is a story that goes back into the battle between Pele and her sister. But it's important to note that back in Polynesia and areas of Tonga, there are eruptions like this where magma and shallow ocean water interact, causing these big explosive eruptions every 2 to 3 years for a long, long time. So it's likely that this is something that the early Hawaiians would have carried with them in their cultural knowledge from Polynesia. Right? So in summary here, many, but not all, because there are places Pele went to that were not rejuvenated volcanics, right? There are other areas that are maybe of cultural importance or other things like that. Many, but not all the places on the older islands that are associated with Pele, and especially with Pele fighting Namaka o Kahai, her sister, the sea goddess, turn out to be locations of hydromagmatic rejuvenation stage volcanism. The youngest is the Koko Rift on Ko'olau, about 40,000 years old, so nobody actually saw the eruptions. But as you know, its past generations undoubtedly witnessed violent hydromagmatic eruptions, perhaps in Tonga there. So I've taken here an image by Herb Kane that's famous on the walls of the Jagger Museum. And if you want to find, you can now buy prints online, herbkanehawaii.com. Get all kinds of fantastic artwork by the artists that I consider to be the Hawaiian Renaissance man, like a Michelangelo. Right, so without getting derailed here, here is his image on the left here of Pele and Namaka fighting as she's digging her fire stick, and I've just superimposed her on the right, perhaps where that knowledge might come from, those eruptions in Tonga, something like that. Yeah, taking a little artistic liberty there. Okay, so what I want to show you guys now is a little bit of the tail end of that, right? Because we're going from part of the story where it really occurs before people were around, to the modern geologic record that was witnessed by people who were living on a volcano. But to connect it to the story between the battle of Pele and her sister Namaka, in many versions ends over on Maui at a place called Kīlauea, the bones of Pele, over in East Maui. That's a cinder cone there. And so there are a couple versions, right? But in one of the versions, Namaka comes and finally catches up to Pele there, and then kills her and strips her body of flesh, as was the tradition in Hawaiian times, and her spirit's what lives on and then travels to Kilauea from there, right? Some other versions talk about how maybe she just lived there and then died there naturally, and then her spirit moved on. But in any case, Kīlauea is the place that Pele is said to have traveled from. And here's an animation of her, whether it was her spirit coming from Kīlauea, that cinder cone over here on the coast of southeast Maui, around coming onto the Puna shoreline at Hiʻiaka. I think that was a place that was famous during the 2018 eruption. We'll revisit that in the future. But from there, she migrates upwards to Halema'uma'u at the summit of Kilauea. And that is the path of Pele onto the island here. So there we'll turn to the geology and the geologic record, and now we're going to turn to the work of Don Swanson. And Don has done all kinds of work on the Kanakakoi ash deposits in the area down southwest of the caldera, including within the caldera walls there. And all that work has produced this now accepted 300-year section of ash deposits and other kind of fallout, right? You can see some examples of how he's really studied this at length, with the shovel digging, figure out what's the top of what and what order everything came in, what connects to where. And he put this all together in a presentation, which is a reminder to me, this is all speculative, of course, speculative correlation between oral traditions and volcanic history of Kilauea between 1200 and 1800 of the Common Era here. So, of course, the earlier Pele's path is, also speculation. It's interesting to see how that might fit together. And of course, this was presented in the light of prompting cultural practitioners to look at these stories once again and see if there are any matches from there, right? So it's worth going out on a limb a little bit to see if there's any connections that arise from those planting of seeds there. So similarly here with Dr. Don Swanson, and I've added a few illustrations here from Dietrich Varez, and Herb Kane is the one that was in the Jagger Museum as well. But the point is here, when did Pele actually arrive to Hawaii Island? And his points are, she's probably is a relatively late comer to Hawaii, consistent with the presence of an established society on Kauai, who's included Lohiʻau. Lohiʻau is the unfortunate chieftain who is loved by Pele, who I suppose now is the time to tell a story. This is a famous story of Pele and Hiʻiaka, her sister Hiʻiakaikapoliopele, that was born of the bosom of Pele. And this is a famous Hawaiian epic story that there is no way that I can do any justice, honestly. I can only summarize very briefly what it's about and try to recap it for you guys that way. Essentially, the story is that after returning from Kauai, that Pele tasked Hiyaka with going to fetch Lohiʻau for her. But on thinking that she had taken too long and had essentially absconded with Lohiʻau, Pele was mad and essentially put out a big lava flow and burned down Hiʻiaka's forest. Hiʻiaka was the deity of the rainforest. And so Lohiʻau is kind of caught in the middle. The story continues that Pele, after burning the forest, Hiʻiaka arrives with Lohiʻau in tow into Hilo. He comes up with her to Kīlauea summit, into the house of Pele, and there they show affection in front of her. And she is infuriated, of course. She kills him again because Hiʻiaka actually had to bring him back from the afterlife earlier in her quest. I kind of glossed over that. But after being buried by lava flows, Hiʻiaka then digs for Lohiʻau's body, and as she digs and throws out rocks, she's marking explosions coming from the crater and excavation of the crater, the collapse of the caldera itself. Right, and so we'll look at the details of that here. That's the skeleton structure of the story for you guys, and it's actually all I can really go into without going on forever here. So, because she's going to Kauai and she's meeting Lohiʻau, and Lohiʻau is already part of an established society, that is one indicator of Pele being a relatively latecomer compared to the early Hawaiians, right? So her arrival may have been sometime in the late 1300s, 100 or 200 years or more after the first Polynesian settlement. Now the settlement date is contested. Don, who presented this, favors that 1220 to 1260 CE settlement date, based on the most rigorous and careful inspection of the data, and consistent with other data sets across other parts of Polynesia. So without going into that whole, that would be consistent. You know, if there was settlement in 1220 to 1260, and then 100 or 200 years later, you're seeing these stories occurring in geologic time here, lining up with the formation of the caldera here. Right, this bottom shot here by Dietrich Varez. I want to make sure we don't miss this one that was in the Jagger Museum for so long, right? Showing the approach of early Hawaiians to early ocean entry, perhaps encountering the elements of lava and snow visible on Mauna Kea here in the top right, all in one place. So I put things a little bit out of order here from how Don presented them, but there is a question of Ailāʻau. Ailāʻau doesn't come up in very many translations. There is Westervelt that suggests that Ailāʻau ruled over Kilauea before Pele arrived. And so this is something we'll dig into more in the future. We're just going to mention it briefly here, that there is some tension there between Pele and Ailāʻau. And he essentially is displaced, whether she boots him out or he leaves voluntarily and she's a caretaker is the modern debate now. In any case, Ailāʻau, the eater of the forests, suggests lava flows entering a forest as would have happened during a lava shield from 1000 to 1400 CE common time. Right? So thus the time of arrival of Pele in the late 1300s is consistent with that date of that summit shield. Ailāʻau was around to build a summit shield, and looking at the geologic map here, it's these kind of purplish lava flows over here, right? They're called the observatory flows. That is the Ailāʻau deity's lava. So it's over here. It's kind of underneath a lot of stuff, and it's covered by a lot of the more recent eruptions. But it's under all the stuff, kind of all around, but covered up, right? And then afterwards, It's while that happens that Pele is arriving and bringing Hiʻiaka, and here's Hiʻiaka, brought in an egg, born of an egg, Pele essentially being a surrogate mother to her, if I can take the liberty of calling it that. So, Birth of Hiʻiaka by Dietrich Varez. You can, once again, dietrichvarez.com there. Check that out. So, moving on, this is a little bit confusing, but there is eruptions that correspond to this image of Pele burning Hiʻiaka's forest over here. Right? This is Kane. It was in the Jagger Museum as well. Story of Pele and Hiʻiaka by Dietrich Varez down here as well. Thought I'd throw some art in to make it a little bit more visually exciting for you guys. But the map here is showing in red the lava that destroyed this forest went all the way to the ocean that corresponds to this legend of Pele and Hiʻiaka. Now it's confusing because this lava is called the Ailāʻau lava flows, and it's not to do with the Ailāʻau deity. It's got to do with Pele and Hiʻiaka. But there's also the source of these is called the Islaal Shield, and once again, that's just a geologic term that is unfortunately misaligned with the cultural information there. So Islaal Shield corresponds to the Pele Hiʻiaka eruption, and prior to that, the observatory flow, an observatory shield that was more over here, that was the Ailāʻau deity's domain. Okay. So that's one aspect of it. Hiʻiaka was warned not to dig too deeply for Lohiʻau, or water would come in and put out the fires of Pele. She's warned by her brother. So how deep was that? Was the question that Don asks, right? And he presented this back in 2013. This is prior to the 2018 activity, so I'll present what he had first. In the 1820s, the floor of the caldera was quite a bit lower, 400 to 550 meters below HVO. Back in 2013, it was 120 meters, right? And you can see that that's what's photographed right in there. Of course, since then, it's changed quite a bit, but we'll come to that here shortly. He does mention the water table is at a depth of about 600 meters below HVO. Below the water table, the rocks are saturated with water, and if a hole is dug, water will fill it. Right? Back in 2013, as we've been telling you guys for a while. You can see this is all fairly commonly talked about. Don says, I think it is likely that Hiʻiaka dug down to about or just below the water table. Consistent with newly developed geologic ideas, the caldera was deeper than 400 meters, and probably 100 to 200 meters deeper than that just after it formed. The evidence, in case you're wondering, is the golden pumice of Kainakakoʻi that doesn't have any bits of lava stuck to it at all, so it's kind of just the frothiest froth of a lava fountain. So the fountain was deep down in a hole, and it was just frothing out, and only the lightest stuff made it out, and that's what you see on the edge, and everything else has been buried ever since then. So that's the story, and of course 2018 requires an update. Here's April 2018, and of course August 2018, and we did collapse way down to intersect the water table. So I can show you guys this video that we've shown before here of time-lapse compilation of the water filling Halema'uma'u from the USGS that we've kind of just stitched together here to show how that process occurred, taking not quite a year after the end of the collapse, but continuing up until this most recent eruption boiled away that entire pond/lake of water within about an hour and a half to 2 hours there. Ultimately ended up being 51 meters deep, 167 feet or so before it was boiled off there. So interesting to hear that talked about and then to see it actually happen. And so back to the question we just had there recently, you know, really a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. It really is a stuff of legends, and this is the legends we're talking about here. So one last story here, not describing the chance, but to quote Don, we know the famous story of Pele throwing rocks at Kamapuaʻa and chasing him into the ocean. Right, Kamapuaʻa, the pig god, depicted here by Kane, and Pele, here she is, battling. One time they were husband and wife, a union, and rumored to have a child. A very fiery, explosive relationship, you might say, right? Big storm clouds and lightning in the air here. Imagine if there were eras where meteorologically you had increased rainfall in a volcano with certain conditions, you might have had periods of lots of explosions, right? And that's what what is being depicted here and what Don Swanson is referring to. And to really illustrate this, I'm going to show here this map of Don Swanson's showing area colored by fallout from explosions. Right, the green is from the late 18th century, maybe the last one, a 1790 explosion. But that might have been the last of a whole series that goes back into the 1500s, right? And so you can see that there are other ones that had fallout all the way down to Hawaiian Acres and possibly further to Pahoa, right? Really not knowing how far it tails off because it's hard to pick it apart from what came afterwards or since as far as vegetation done there. But lots of different fans of ash. And of course, to bring it back around, this is an image of 1790, courtesy of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, artist's depiction of the death of the army of Kīlauea here. You can see this third group of warriors arriving and finding the second group of warriors all lying prone on the ground here. Many in embrace. So that's how it ties back to the Volcano Watch this week. So to wrap it all together here, from Don, geology in the left column here, ages from carbon-14 or other methods, and tradition in the right column right over here, right? So after Pele arrives on the island here, or when she arrives, Ailāʻau is around, building the summit shield, right, in the era of 1400 CE. Right? The waning of the shield in the late 1300s, perhaps coincident with the initiation of caldera collapse. We don't really know how long the caldera took to form, but it might have been an incremental thing over time. Is the arrival of Pele and the transition to Pele becoming the deity in control of the volcano here. To the point where she's already having her adventures by the 1400s, where the lava flow that covers much of Puna, right, all of HPP and the one that's called the Ailāʻau lava flow is actually the story of Pele and Hiʻiaka that dates back to 1410 to 1470 CE there. Right? Collapse of the caldera, perhaps 1470 to 1500 CE, corresponding to Hiʻiaka digging for the body of Lohiʻau. Right? There could have been many collapses. This certainly would have been the biggest one that we're talking about, the biggest event. There might have been smaller events that occurred before then. That's not quite clear and not a tangent I'll go into today, but it is published. And then finally here, explosive eruptions, perhaps when lakes were in a caldera, between 1500 and 1790, corresponding to Pele's quarrels with Kamapuaʻa, deaths of hundreds in Kīlauea's group. Right, so that's it all together there, and that ties together the part of Scott Rowland recounting a possible connection of the stories of Pele to the story of evolution of the Hawaiian Islands, as well as rejuvenation in Hawaiian Islands, to the story of Kīlauea itself here, portrayed by Don Swanson. He does have a few things to summarize, right? Besides the actual events that are noted there. He does note that volcanologists used to think the caldera formed and all their eruptions took place all in 1 year in 1790. And recently, it's been shown to be true, to be false. I showed you guys a 300-year section there, and of course, oral tradition has been saying that the entire time. So if Western science had taken into account earlier that oral tradition, maybe they would not have made that mistake and put everything into 1 year there. That's essentially the looking back, right? There's a couple of things they say looking forward. Don does say that there's more lessons to be learned there, and he would like to see Hawaiian-speaking volcanologists examine all the Pele chants and other oral traditions related to volcanoes. So, generalized to all sciences, tsunami, earthquakes, storms, right? He thinks that his work is just preliminary, and it's only helpful if it spurs on more efforts by Hawaiian speakers who can really translate these properly, right? So that's one aspect of it. Pua Kanahele, who haven't really mentioned yet, but is a large part of this workshop that took place in 2013, does note here, I'll quote her a little bit, we need to start composing. And she's speaking of herself and her Hawaiian community. And she does give a little bit of insight, and they did work to correct this, but at the time, this is what was documented in a publication. They don't allow us to go right by the flow and watch the flow go by as we used to, or watch the big things that are going on up there. So we cannot get it firsthand. We have to look at and talk about securing videos of these flows, Kamoamoa, Pu'o'o, Kapoho are all Hulihia type of eruptions, and we should compose chants for them. Those kind of things we should write about. We must continue to create historical poetry about our land changes, etc. That's Pua Kanahele's thought there, right? And of course, it's different if you can't feel the vibration of the ground, like, through your torso, and and pounding, as everyone who saw the 2018 eruption. It's a different thing to feel it, to be able to express it, and that was what she was getting at. For at the time, what was a Pu'o'o eruption, of course, different times now. So we'll end it with that.